this video we're going to focus on how to use the rendering facilities within Solidworks. Now if you haven't already created the dice from the previous video, I would suggest that you take a look at that one first and create your own dice, because that is the object that we're going to have a go at with this tutorial to show you how to render that to make it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more appealing, which you can then use as part of portfolio work or some of your design ideas. It just allows people to see a lot more detail. Now let's have a look at this one. So I've got Solidworks and I've got my dice here. This is what I did before. If for whatever reason you haven't got it open here as a recent document, you can just click open and you can go through your folders to find where you've saved your dice. Now of course these skills are transferable to other objects. You can use these skills on pretty much any object that you come up with, but I'm just going to be using this one to show you a couple of things. Now the first thing that I would suggest you do is go to Solidworks add-ins, and you want to open up the one that says Photo View 360. This will then add another tab here which is called Render Tools. Now we will be using these quite a lot to add our renders and our final renders for our objects. Whenever you just add a normal feature for an object, it's just quite a standard colour. If we click over at the right side where we've got appearances, we've got two options. You've got appearances which are colour. Now these are the appearances that you can add onto objects. They've got a massive variety of different things that you can add to your objects. If I click this one, you've got scenes. So these are some of the scenes that you can drag and drop on to give your object a little bit more of a background, a bit of a more interesting look. So we could add a reflective floor, for example. So you just hold down the left mouse button, drag it on and just let it go on the background. Now it adds a different background effect. Now these effects are fully visualized once we are fully rendering. Now the idea for this is that it gives you a different floor or different space to render in, which then allows you to give a much more realistic view of your object. Now we've got the idea of the scenes. Let's have a look at the actual appearances for the objects. Now these are slightly more complex. So if we push the drop down, we can go to high gloss, and if you add high gloss, it does add a reflectiveness to the material, which can be quite nice depending on the object. So I'm going to take this black high gloss, hold down the left mouse button and just drag it onto the object. Now when you let go of the mouse button, don't move the mouse at the moment because you want to see there's extra options that appear. So you've got face, that means it will just add that colour to the face. You can add it so it adds it to the entire extrude, which might be useful if you want to quickly add it to the entire outside of your dice. You can do it so it adds to the entire body of the object or the entire Solidworks dice. So you can add these appearances very quickly to different parts. However, if you just quickly rush and quickly add these on and then move your mouse away, it doesn't complete the option. So you need to make sure that you drag it on, let go of the left mouse button and then select one of these options. So I'm going to make it so my entire dice main body is that colour. So I get that colour on all the sides. Now I'm going to add a slightly different colour. I'm going to add maybe a low gloss for the inside of it. So I'm going to add a nice red. Now again, you can see that I can do it on the face, I can do it on the extrude, it cut there, or I can do it on the body, which adds it to all of them. So if I did body, for example, it adds it to all of them all the way around. So again, I've saved myself quite a lot of time. Now you can create some quite interesting effects by zooming in and looking at these, because you can actually add light. So you might decide to add a lighting effect to just that face, and you might want to add that effect to all the different faces. Now lights do create quite a nice effect, however you have to be very careful where you add them and how they are used, because they can be very overwhelming with different parts of your design. So I'm just adding these on just to show you a couple of different things about what they can do and what they'll look like when we've finished. So I'll do it on this side, and then we're going to have a go at doing a render so that we don't have to do the entire dice, and you'll see the difference. Oh, too quick there. So go back, do it on there, click, and I'm just going to focus on rendering perhaps these sides at the moment. I'll leave the 2 on the side here so that you can see the difference of the render. Now, we had a look at the appearances. Let's have a look at those render tools. So on here, you can do something that's called the preview window or integrated preview. Now, integrated preview, it will turn your entire window into a view of similar to what it would look like when it's rendered. Now, it can cause quite a lot of slowing down of certain machines, and it does cause a little bit of lagging, slowing down. I would recommend personally using the preview window as opposed to the integrated preview. So if I did integrated preview, it comes up asking me if I want to use a camera. I don't at the moment. So if I do this, you'll see that it kind of pixelates the screen and it takes a little while for it to load. But it does mean that every time you move your screen, it will take a few seconds to load, which can be a little bit more strenuous on certain machines. So it depends on the quality of the computer that you're using. However, another way that you can view this is if you turn that off, so just click it once to turn it off. If you do preview window, it actually brings up a separate window which then allows you to still view it, but it loads far quicker than the other view. So it will load up and then you can move and it will load up again and move again. So you can see that it's moving much more smoothly and I can still get an idea of my render. Now you might be wondering, why don't we just do a final render? The reason you wouldn't just do a final render, and it's best to have a look at your design first, is you might start the final render and some of them can take hours and hours and hours depending on how complex those parts are. So if you've got loads of like glass and loads of reflective scenes and loads of parts that are going to reflect with themselves, it takes much longer. So you're much better to actually take your time, get it right, and then you can have a go at a render. Now if I went into options, opens up the options along the side here. I'll make this a little bit bigger so we can see this a bit more clearly. Now on here, it's telling us what kind of view it's going to render at. I tend to stick to the HD version of the 1920 by 1080. This keeps quite a nice aspect ratio for me. On here, yours will have a standard of final render quality is good. Okay, so if you do a final render of good, it's going to be okay. It's going to be kind of that basic quality, and you can see a huge difference between the rendering. Now, if I just render this as it is now, so I've got my final render is good, and we'll see what difference it makes. So if I do a final render at good, whatever is the scene on this screen in this area is what it will render. So let's go to final render. Let's let it do its thing. It will load up an integrated render which quickly shows what it's going to render, and then we get our render window here. Now you can see the orange dots and the orange squares that appeared incredibly quickly there. They are the bits that process it. Now you can see that actually that view and that view aren't very different, because that integrated view is pretty much what it's going to turn out as. Now let's turn up those settings. Let's get them much better. So let's change this to maximum. Let's add some bloom. So bloom refers to how many reflective points it will have and how much detail it's going to have on there. So it adds a lot more of a blooming effect to it basically, which gives a lot more detail to it. And let's tick it. Now you'll notice that when I do my final render this time, it will go a bit slower. That previous one was incredibly quick, but you can see that it starts adding in the details. It does the main details, and then the orange squares come on in, and they're the ones that are adding those finer bits of detail. Now the preview that you see on here will not have as great effect when it's in this view. You sort of need to save it as an actual image to fully appreciate it. This is a really good view of it because it will allow me to zoom in a minute and we can have a look at some extra details. I will also add a slightly more complex tutorial on how to render and how to set up lights. This is more of a basic getting started with rendering, because you can add cameras, you can add animation, and you can have it so that you can rotate the object whilst rendering it at the same time. So you create a really nice rendered movie clip of an object showing off more angles than just one scene or just one side of it, which can be quite nice for showing clients and showing people what you can do with the software. So that's finished. Now you can zoom in by scrolling the mouse wheel, so you can see that it's got the level of detail there. It's got quite a nice effect there, and it's just about playing with the different settings. So you can see that it's changed some of the quality there, it's changed the shadows within the actual shape, and it's quite nice that it shows the different objects. And then you can see my previous renders that I've done before with some different colours and some different effects. So best thing to do is to have a go with some different scenes, some different effects, and to see what you can create with that.